My God, I love them. Sometimes I hated them.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and we are going to break down Saltburn, all the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed. This movie is blowing up the internet with its shocking scenes and its beautiful cinematography. There is incredible detail and symbolism packed into every frame, and the ending sequence perfectly wraps up this modern-day parable. So, let's get into it, and spoiler warnings are ahead. We open with this cigarette case, engraved with a Cattons coat of arms. The star and the moon are a reference to the Midsummer Night's Dream themed party that the Cattons throw for Oliver's birthday. But the moon also symbolizes how Oliver takes their place. It's rising just like Oliver is rising to power. We cut to the opening credits. Saltburn flashes across the screen in script straight out of a medieval manual. Now, Saltburn is the name of the Cattons country estate, and the real-life house actually goes back to the 1300s. So this ornate medieval script gives a sense of the history that we're stepping into. There is a long legacy for all these characters, places, and families. We start this beautiful tracking shot through Oxford while the official royal coronation music plays. Now, this movie does a great job of juxtaposition. We hear this regal music. We're walking through these gorgeous grounds, but it's paired with regular students getting ready for school. People fight with their parents.
Daddy, you forgot my fucking tuck box.
There's a laundry basket full of clothes and awful 2006 fashion trends. It's both opulent and relatable, setting the tone for the rest of the movie. Then we finally see Oliver Quick, our lead character, under a banner that says, "Welcome Class of 2006. Now, if you look closely, he is slightly off-center. This gives the viewer an uneasy feeling and subtly points out how he doesn't belong. So the next 10 minutes show just how out of place Oliver is. And then we get our first proper introduction to Felix, and this one scene tells us so much about him. He has a flat tire and he's just spinning the wheel while sighing. He even says,
"Yeah, of course, it's when I'm already 10 minutes late for my tutorial."
Now, he could have started wheeling at the class, but instead, he just sits down. It's subtle, but it shows us his entitlement. He doesn't work to solve his problems. He just waits, and Oliver knows that he can use that entitlement to his advantage. We cut to the pub, and I love this shot because we see it from Oliver's perspective. Even though his friend is speaking, he is completely out of focus. The actual focus is on Felix on the other side of the room. Also, his friend, the weird math guy, he is played by Ewan Mitchell, the same guy that plays Prince Aemond in House of the Dragon.
Duality.
Felix spots Oliver, and then we cut to this montage of the next semester. It switches between them at the pub where he gets to know Oliver and all their shenanigans. Look at this brilliant little editing moment. Felix offers him a cigarette and Oliver says he doesn't smoke, and then we immediately cut to him later in their friendship smoking with him. Those two shots tell us that Felix is in control. And then Felix asks him about his past.
They've got problems.
What kind of? What do you mean problems?
Now, later in the movie, Felix thinks his mother's questions are rude, but he's doing the exact same thing. He's not quite as invasive as Elspeth, but he's still pushing for very personal information. Throughout the movie, all of these characters criticize each other for the exact same behavior that they engage in, and it starts right here. Now, toward the end of the film, Oliver says he lied about his past because,
Look, I just gave you what you wanted!
and that's very true. Oliver doesn't start off lying. In fact, he says nothing about his family, but as he makes his story sadder and sadder, Felix responds better. And look at how they pair these two clips in the montage.
It's all tough.
These clips are months apart. Felix never grew tired of hearing Oliver's made-up trauma. He was voyeuristic of his pain because it was so far removed from his own life. Oliver was like a soap opera to him. And later, Oliver engages in voyeurism. It's dark, so Felix can't see out of his window, and this is a beautiful parallel for their relationship. Oliver is a voyeur to Felix's actual life. He sees his life and he covets it, but Felix isn't exactly looking into Oliver's life. He thinks he is, but in truth, Oliver's life is completely shrouded in darkness. Then, as if to emphasize this, the next shot is Felix lying on his floor, perfectly framed by sunlight coming through his window. Meanwhile, Oliver's silhouette is cast in the window light next to him. That night, Oliver tries to find him at the pub, and once again, he is framed by this window, literally on the outside looking in. Right next to him, there's this drawing of a man with horns, and when he walks down the street, he also passes a pub named The Bull. Now, there is a lot of bull imagery in this movie, and we'll talk about what it all means a little bit later, but it's important to note that it begins here and marks a distinct change in Oliver. He is actively becoming a monster because, in this exact moment, he decides to lie to Felix about his father. When he lies to Felix the next morning, Felix invites him in. And notice how the curtains are red, just like the curtains in the dining room of Saltburn and Elspeth's hospice room. Now that is what I call foreshadowing. We cut to the Oxford ball. Farley walks up to Oliver and says,
"Oh, nice tux. It's a rental, right?"
Now, a big theme in this movie is social capital versus monetary capital. Some characters have both, like the Cattons, but some characters only have one or the other, like Farley. What's social capital? Well, within the upper class, it's the ability to fit in and know all the unspoken rules.
It's all the sort of strange rules of codified social behavior that is just mystifying.
Farley is broke, but he fits in with the upper class because he's grown up around them his entire life. He knows all the rules. He might not be able to buy a tux himself, but he knows.
Always check the sleeves.
But his lack of actual capital doesn't make him any less elitist. Look at this line here.
I mean, you're almost passing. For what? A real human boy?
He's actually saying that Oliver's almost passing for upper class, but the addition of real human boy implies that he only views the upper class as real people. Felix whisks Oliver away to do this rock throwing ceremony.
We have this tradition, right? When somebody dies, we write their name on a stone and we chuck it in the river.
But when Oliver throws his rock, it lands in vomit.
Well, that can't be good.
It's just so funny.
Oh, it's so much more than just funny.
Wait, you're here again?
Yes, I told you. I'm always watching. But listen, the stone is played as a really funny moment, and don't get me wrong, it made me chuckle. But think about it. The Cattons have a ritual surrounding death, and the ritual says the dead family member's stone is thrown into the water, and Oliver's stone misses. The ritual is not completed. As funny as it is, it's actually our first tip-off that his dad isn't dead, and Oliver's lying about everything.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. We cut to the day Oliver arrives at Saltburn. Now, this movie really plays with these period piece tropes, despite being set in 2006. You can't tell me that this shot and musical swell doesn't feel right out of Downton Abbey. As he walks to the front door, he cuts through the grass instead of walking on the gravel entrance. Again, it's a small detail, but we immediately get this sense of intrusion. When the doors open, we see the butler, Duncan, and he is framed from this low angle. Now, this shot works on two levels. On one hand, we're seeing him the way Oliver sees him. He's very imposing. But also, this is how you would do a medium shot of a statue. Emerald Fennell said,
He could have lived for 1,000 years. He could be, you know, one of the bricks.
And this framing reinforces that, making it feel like he is part of the house itself. They walk in and we get this beautiful shot of the interior, but the closer you look, the more that you realize that some things are just off. There's a piece of flypaper hanging from the chandelier. There's a hat on the bust. There's a motorcycle inexplicably in the entrance hall. Saltburn is opulent, but if you look closely enough, there's little things that are just trashy, like the Cattons themselves. They look high class on the surface, but as you really get to know them, you learn that they're just kind of awful. Felix gives a tour of Saltburn, and notice, even as we're walking through this magnificent house, the camera's completely focused on Felix. He's pointing to stuff and the camera is not following. It's just locked on him. Now, we are seeing this all from Oliver's point of view, and the most important thing to him is Felix. After the walkthrough, we cut to this diorama that says the Catton Players on top. Now, I love this thing. It looks so old, almost like an antique, but if you look closely, it has the current members of the family. That means that they either update the diorama with every new generation, which inherently destroys its antique nature, or they paid a lot of money for it to look like an antique. It's a critique on how the British aristocracy is inherently stuck in the past. We switch to the library and get Elspeth's first line.
They probably don't have rehab in Liverpool.
We instantly learn how out of touch she is because Liverpool is not a small town. It is the 4th largest city in England. For reference, the 4th largest city in the United States is Houston. Now, I'm not saying it's a one-to-one comparison, but it's still crazy they're treating Liverpool like it's a whole different country. Oliver can hear them talking about him in the hallway. He even hears Pamela say,
I think when you're poor, that sort of thing does happen a little bit more.
which is ironic because Pamela is an addict herself despite her more privileged upbringing. Also, Elspeth immediately kicks her out when Oliver enters and begins gossiping about her.
No, she is rather dull, actually.
And Pamela can probably hear that in the hall. Elspeth is literally swapping people out like toys and doesn't even care if they know it. That becomes even clearer with the first dinner scene. Traditionally, the highest ranking male guest gets to sit to the left of the hostess, where Oliver is sitting, whereas the highest ranking female guest gets to sit to the left of the host. Theoretically, that should be Pamela, as she is the only female guest, but instead, it's Venetia. To make it even more awkward, Pamela is the only person in the middle without anyone across from her. Through seating chart alone, they are insulting her. After dinner, we get another great play on the period piece genre when Oliver spots Venetia outside his window. She looks straight out of a gothic romance. When Oliver goes to check on her, she says,
"We're all about to lose our minds."
which is the film's tagline. Then she says,
"I'm cold-blooded. We're all cold-blooded, haven't you noticed?"
Again, this is a reference to the fact that all of the Cattons are just terrible people. But unlike her mother and brother who have savior complexes, she is aware of it. We see this at other points in the movie, like when she says,
I mean, he never liked sharing his toys, even the ones he doesn't want to play with anymore.
or when she's harsher about Farley than her brother.
That's ridiculous. He's more spoiled than we are.
And at the end, she's the only one who figures out what happened.
Ranger f***ing danger. You've made your holes. Everything.
Venetia is actually the most perceptive family member, and that's established right here. We cut to breakfast where Venetia tells the story of Percy Bysshe Shelley's doppelganger.
Shelley's housekeeper was cleaning one of the rooms when Shelley walked past the window and waved at her. She waved back before she realised that Shelley was in Italy. And she was on the top floor of the house.
And if you look behind her, Felix's doppelganger passes by the window outside, foreshadowing his death. Also, Pamela has a bracelet that resembles the star on the Catton family crest, which shows how desperate she is to stay in their good graces. Then we start this epic montage of the first month of their summer. Now, we love this montage for two reasons. The first is how it juxtaposes this glitzy life with very relatable moments. The semicircle tracking shot shows it amazingly. At first, this just looks like a group of 20-somethings hanging out by a dirty pond. But as it swings out, we see more and more fancy details, like this old-fashioned in a crystal cup. And then, finally, at the end, we see the entire manor. We are literally moving from relatable to extreme luxury. Or what's the second reason? The second reason is the music choice. I mean, overall, the music choices in this movie are stellar, but this one in particular stands out. The song is Time to Pretend by MGMT, and listen to these lyrics. Now let's have some fun. Yeah, it's overwhelming, but what else can we do? Get jobs in offices and wake up for the morning commute? Forget about our mothers and our friends. We're fated to pretend. This perfectly encapsulates Oliver. He's willing to eschew his whole life and family for this. Such an insane amount of money and privilege that he can live in absolute hedonism. The montage ends with Oliver looking out at the maze. Look at the shirt he's wearing. This is the same shirt he's wearing the day Felix discovers that Oliver's dying. And he's studying the maze where Felix ultimately dies. So this movie isn't linear. It is cutting between the summer, the day Oliver kills Felix, and the day Oliver kills Elspeth. And then we get to the bathtub scene, which I don't want to talk about.
I will.
Take it away, Brianna.
Okay, so I won't get too specific because it is kind of gross, but I want to talk about the symbolism. One of my favorite TikTokers, JStube, said this.
The act of Oliver consuming the bodily fluids of the Cattons is very much like ritualistic. It's very effective foreshadowing, and it also really illustrates how desperate Oliver is to just completely consume these people and everything they represent.
This scene isn't just gross out shock value. There's a reason it comes after this hedonistic montage. It's because if Oliver sold his soul by partying with them all summer, this is the blood covenant. This is what seals the deal. And it is super gross and uncomfortable and depraved, but it's supposed to be. Ultimately, this guy will trade his humanity for the money and power of the Cattons. I would say the murder is objectively more depraved than this. This didn't hurt anybody, but for the audience, myself included, this is what makes us gasp and realize how grossly obsessed with status Oliver is.
Thank you for finding meaning in that. Now we cut to another nighttime scene with Oliver and Venetia. And when Oliver seduces Venetia, he brings up her eating disorder. Why would you do that, person? Well, think about what Elspeth said in the prior scene.
We thought you'd grow out of it, the throwing up.
That makes me think that her family never actually talked to her about it or gave her any support. So Oliver mentioning it makes her feel like somebody actually cares. Urgh, gross. I know, right? Now, the next day, Felix finds out what happened and he is not happy.
Really, you're my friend. You're supposed to be here with me.
My theory is that Oliver always planned to take over the family, but originally he wasn't going to murder them. Instead, he wanted to marry Venetia and then scheme to take over the title and Saltburn. But he didn't anticipate how jealous Felix would get, so he switched tactics. I can't figure out why Oliver would sleep with Venetia if he knew it would alienate him from Felix and give Farley the upper hand. It only makes sense if it's an actual misstep. We get this dinner and karaoke scene with the Henrys, as James calls them.
They're all called Henry.
Not all of them, just most.
Farley calls Oliver to sing Rent by the Pet Shop Boys, and obviously it's humiliating for him because the lyrics are, I love you, you pay me rent. But then Oliver says,
this is your song as well, Farley, come finish it.
And Farley jumps at the opportunity to sing.
Only if you insist.
You took me to a restaurant on Broadway.
Yeah, he killed it. Oh, he absolutely killed it. Archie Mataquie released that single. But what Oliver says is true. It's also Farley's song. The Cattons literally pay his rent. They pay for his school, but he's not embarrassed because he feels entitled to the Cattons' money. His mother had a title, so this is his birthright, so to speak.
This isn't a dream to me. It's my house.
So he can proudly sing the line, you pay my rent, without any embarrassment because even though he barely has any money, he still feels entitled to this luxury lifestyle and high social status. And then Oliver smashes his mirror. Yeah, geez, talk about anger issues. Well, I don't think this is actually about anger issues. Look at how he wraps his hand up first to make sure he won't cut himself. That's not really something you do if you punch a mirror out of rage. Instead, I think he took a shard of glass for Farley. If Oliver's sexual advances didn't work, he would have threatened him. Like I said earlier, I don't think Oliver's original plan was to kill the Cattons, but he was never above violence. The next morning, the mirror's fixed. It's all symbolic of how all the Cattons' problems get swept away under the rug. It reminded me of this quote from The Great Gatsby.
They were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and people and then retreated back into their money and their vast carelessness.
They don't deal with their mess, and their distance from their own consequences only further isolates them from humanity. Just like the mirror, Farley is a problem that's swept under the rug, never to be mentioned again. Elspeth and James would rather talk about the heat than kicking out their nephew. And look at how they act about a problem they have to attend to.
God, I wish we didn't have to go to London. Pamela's funeral. She'd do anything for attention.
I gotta be honest, that is the most chilling line in the entire movie for me. Also, let's talk about this line.
I used to hang out with them all, actually, when I was modelling. Then, of course, Common People came out, and everybody thought it was written about me.
Now, it's not funny just because she's clearly bragging while pretending she isn't. It's funny because Common People is about a rich girl acting like she's poor. The lyrics are, I want to live like common people. I want to do whatever common people do. I want to sleep with common people. And earlier, Elspeth said she lived in a bedsit.
Love living in a bedsit in my 20s. It's so freeing to live all in one room.
Just like Oliver, she co-opted the experiences of the working class. Even Felix does this to a certain extent. When they're driving to Prescott, they're in a 1980s Land Rover. Felix doesn't have to drive a car that's nearly 30 years old. He's choosing to, and my guess is that's because he thinks it looks cool. And that is a very common behavior among the rich. It is gauche to admit how much money you have. I mean, just look at this clip of David and Victoria Beckham.
We're very working class.
Be honest.
What
car did you get your dad to drive?
It depends. In the 80s, my dad had a Rolls Royce.
And it's really problematic because they pretend like they don't have money, but still they get all the privileges of having money. And then we pull up to this large house in the suburbs, and it's clear that Oliver has been lying about everything.
What?
Look at how well this scene is set. This is obviously a very nice house. Most of us would be thrilled to live in a house like this, but it isn't Saltburn. The best difference is in the food. Instead of actual champagne, they have sparkling wine. There's hors d'oeuvres, but they're served next to a bowl of pretzels. Again, all of this is nice, but it's an imitation of the actual luxury of households like Saltburn. But more expensive hardly means more considerate. Think about the cake. Oliver's mother hand bakes a cake for him. She takes her own time to do that.
Oliver, your mother spent all morning making lunch.
And Elspeth hired someone to make a fancy cake that she never even tried.
I never had any in the end. That's always the way, isn't it?
Was Elspeth's cake more luxurious? Absolutely. But was it actually nicer? Was it more considerate? No. I think Felix genuinely feels bad for Oliver's parents.
Of course we can stay. We would love to stay.
And in some ways, there might even be jealousy. Oliver's parents genuinely want to connect with him, whereas Elspeth and James are comfortable with the emotional distance between them and their children. The pair get back to Saltburn, fight over the lie, and I think this is the exact moment Oliver decides to kill him.
Can you not tell your family, please?
If nobody else knows that Oliver was lying, then he has no motive to kill him. He can get away scotch-free. And also, look, there is another Minotaur-like figure in the painting behind him. And then we switch to the party, and the theme is A Midsummer Night's Dream, because that is a really cool idea for a party.
Well, it's also super symbolic. A Midsummer Night's Dream is a Shakespearean comedy that is really weird and heady. Like, there are fairies and a love potion. A guy grows the head of a donkey. It's just a really weird play where anything could happen. And that's why the first shot of the party is Venetia. She's the one who said, we're all about to lose our minds. Like I said, the play itself is absolutely insane. This party is the night the Cattons' lives are getting turned upside down. But unlike in A Midsummer Night's Dream, it'll never get fixed. Also, Venetia is wearing a spider dress, and later we find out that James calls Oliver a spider. It's a physical way to show that Oliver has already taken over.
Thank you for that. I actually haven't read A Midsummer Night's Dream since middle school, but Midsummer Night's Dream was a really famous theme for Playboy parties. How do you know that, person? No reason. We fast forward to the party in full swing. As Oliver walks around this party, we hear the song Loneliness by Tomcraft, and the lyrics are, happiness seems to be loneliness. Now, this seems like it's reflecting his current emotional state. He's clearly very lonely right now, but it's actually foreshadowing. Happiness seems to be loneliness. Oliver may not be happy right now, but he will be when the Cattons are all dead. Oliver follows Felix Felix as he leaves the party to have sex in the maze. Now, two things about this. Firstly, part of the reason Felix dies is his own inconsiderate nature. This party is at Felix's house. If he wanted to hook up with a girl, he could take them to his room, but instead he takes them to the middle of this maze to have sex under a Minotaur statue where anybody could walk in. It's not cool. Secondly, he's definitely done this before and probably bragged about it to Oliver. Oliver was studying the maze earlier. He knew what Felix would do. They get into this fight, and as Oliver walks away, he says,
I don't care what you think anymore.
And that's true. He doesn't, because Felix already drank the champagne and he's basically already dead. Now we get this montage of beautiful shots, but this last one stands out. It's like in a period piece where a commander is looking up at the castle, and the next morning he's a king looking down from his castle. He's usurped the throne from Felix. We get this overhead shot and Felix's body is in the shadow of the Minotaur. And now we finally get to talk about the Minotaur myth and why there has been so much bull imagery. So back in ancient Greece, the king Minos had a bull that he refused to sacrifice to Poseidon. So Poseidon made his wife fall in love with the bull. She birthed a monster that was half bull and had to eat people to survive. So they locked it in a labyrinth and gave it sacrifices of Athenian children. Theseus slayed the beast with some help from King Minos' daughter, Ariadne, and was applauded as a hero. But afterwards, he was kind of awful. On his way back home, he abandoned Ariadne on a random island. He also didn't change his ship's flags from the mourning flags. So when his father saw his ship approaching, he thought his son was dead and killed himself. And then Theseus became king. Or what's the lesson there? In a parable sense, I'm not sure, but there's two ways it relates here. One reading is that Oliver is Theseus. Oliver literally descended into the center of the labyrinth to kill the beast. This isn't to say that Felix is particularly beastly, but he is the son of the metaphorical king, Sir James. And Oliver uses this victory not to change the system, but rather to make himself king. However, you can also say that Oliver is the Minotaur. He literally wears a costume with horns, and he is surrounded by bull imagery throughout the movie. Oliver stalks his prey in the labyrinth and kills him. But the metaphorical labyrinth isn't just the maze itself. It's the entire property of Saltburn. Think about how Duncan says,
lots of people get lost in Saltburn.
One by one, Oliver killed off his prey in the labyrinth of their own home. And then we cut to the lunch scene and everyone is trying to pretend that everything's normal.
I think it was a hit, don't you, darling?
It's another nod to Gothic tradition, where these people are like Victorian ghosts. They're stuck in the past, ignoring that the world's completely changed around them.
Does no one else find it weird?
And it's fitting because they'll all be literal ghosts very soon. And when the curtains are closed, they're bathed in this red light because they have descended into their own personal hell. At Felix's funeral, only his immediate family and Oliver attend. Now this is a callback to The Great Gatsby. Everybody will attend their parties, but no one will attend their funerals. The most intriguing thing about them is their opulence, and when that's gone, everybody else is gone too. And then Oliver has sex with Felix's grave. What? Oh, jeez, why did you do that? It's complicated. Right before this, he is left out of the family's mourning ritual. And as much as Oliver hated him, he loved him too. Also, after the hedonism of the summer, he is mostly comfortable expressing his emotions physically. We see that with the bath, with Farley, and with Venetia. He can't wax poetically about Felix until years later, but in that moment, he gets as physically close to Felix as possible. We switch back to the living room where Oliver first met all the Cattons, but now there's a big change. Instead of Felix in the room with them, his portrait hangs on the wall, watching them. He, like all his ancestors before him, has become part of the house. When he leaves the living room, Elspeth says,
"But you're not leaving us. You're not leaving Saltburn."
Now that might seem crazy, but it makes perfect sense. Oliver was the closest person to Felix in the last months of his life. She's attached Felix to losing him, and losing him would make him feel like losing another part of her son. Later that night, Venetia's taking a bath in Felix's bathroom, and she's figured Oliver out.
I think you're a moth. Just desperate to get in.
But why would she kill herself if she figured it out? Well, later we do find out that Oliver did purposely place the razors next to her. But also, even though she's figured it out, what actually changes for her? She doesn't have any evidence for the police and her brother is still dead. That knowledge doesn't fix anything, and she has struggled with mental health for years. Her bulimia is mentioned a lot. It's really sad, and please, if anybody is feeling this way, please reach out for help. because I don't think she saw a way out of her grief. Oliver leaves Saltburn, and notice that while he entered through the grand front entrance, he left through the back door. That's probably how everyone who was forced out of Saltburn left. They were treated like royalty when they were fun and entertaining, and then stripped of their status when they weren't. Years later, Elspeth and Oliver reunite, and I loved how Fennel uses the face mask to show us the passage of time. You just immediately see the masks and you know when this scene takes place. Elspeth asks if he's happy, and he says,
"Not really."
Just like everything else, this is a very intentional play on his part. He knows if Elspeth feels bad for him, she'll take him back in. He's using her savior complex against her. And then, of course, he kills her. And it's revealed that he was behind all of their deaths. The movie ends with him dancing down the halls of Saltburn in the exact inverse of the first tour by Felix. He's acting out one of their memories, but now it's twisted, just like he is. The final shot is him looking down at the Catton players' diorama, a visual representation that they were puppets and he was the puppet master. Also, he has their stones. These aren't trophies. He's not gloating. It's his way of keeping them close to him. It's an example of the love-hate dichotomy.
I hate all of you.
He loved what they had. He hated them enough to kill them all. And then he loved them enough to cherish their house and keep their memories with him. That's beautiful, but I don't get this movie. What's it all mean? Well, I'm here to tell you, I've seen people criticize this movie by claiming it has nothing to do about class, and I thoroughly disagree. However, I think the class commentary is more nuanced than a straightforward eat the rich story like Parasite or Ready or Not. I love those movies, but the class commentary is very easy to grasp. This is a movie where there are no good guys. The Cattons are vapid, shallow, and they use people as toys. Because of their money and their privilege, they have very little empathy. They are not good people, but clearly, Oliver the murderer is not the hero either. He doesn't kill these people for justice, he kills them to become them. This film is a criticism of the societal lust for more and more and more. It is about never-ending greed. Oliver is very well off. He had a very comfortable life. He did not need more, but he wanted more. It didn't matter how comfortable he was. He would do anything for a higher status. And to make it worse, he saw the ugliest sides of the Cattons and it didn't deter him at all. Again, Jay Stoobs on TikTok said it perfectly.
He comes face to face with this really uncomfortable truth that in order to reach the status and level that the Cattons have is to forego your entire humanity.
Oliver is the winner of the film, but he's also the villain. The Cattons are the losers, and they're also bad people who don't care about anybody. Within the film, though, everybody at the top is awful. And if only the villains are at the top of this system, maybe there's something inherently wrong with the system. Well, guys, big shout out to the writer of that video, Brianna McLarty. You saw her earlier. You can follow her socials below. Let us know what you thought about the movie and anything we missed down in the comments or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.